Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Breathe Your Truth webinar on Stick Your Exercise Plan. And by stick, I really just mean land it well, not as in like shove it. That's not cool. All right, let's start off with a little bit of an activity. Make a little space for yourself. Come on up to standing. We're going to do just a very small squat. Nothing that's going to be aggravating to your knees, I hope. We're going to come up and we're going to go down. Super simple. You can go as low as you'd like. I'm not going to go very low. You don't have to either. The idea is we're just going to do this movement. Spoiler alert, we're going to do this 3 times, each time just a little bit differently. This is going to give you some information that we're going to need soon. So right now it's just a lift, to settle, a lift, and a settle. I know some of you are probably just getting to it now, had to get yourself rearranged. So let's do a couple more. A lift and a settle. One more. And a settle. And now shake it out. Do a little shaking of the legs, shake the arms. Shaking is always good to just burn off a little extra steam. I had a little bit of extra steam and anxiety to burn off because I was getting ready for a webinar and now I'm good. Okay, so let's do round number 2. Here's how it goes. With a breath in, we're going to come up. And with a breath out, we're going to drop down. Now I encourage you to let the breath be subtle. It doesn't have to be a big breath. It's just coordinated. So we're coordinating the breath with the movement. We're coming in through the nose and out through the mouth. Do a couple of those where we're breathing out through the mouth, and then we're going to switch it to just in and out through the nose. So a breath in through the nose. A breath out through the nose. Coordinating or tying the breath to the movement. 2 more. And a breath out. And we're back to shaking. Shake it out. A little shaking of the arms, shake the legs. And then the last one, the third one, we're going to disconnect the breath to the movement. In other words, we're going to just keep this movement going, whatever pace feels comfortable, but untie the breath to it. So you may take, let's say, a breath in, and a breath out, out, keeping it going, having nothing to do with the movement, but having an awareness of the breath. You can even try going super slow with the movement. Again, the movement disconnected from the breath. Both conscious, but happening independent of each other. There are benefits to both. There are benefits to tying the breath to movement. There's benefits to disconnecting the breath from movement. And you guessed it, we're going to talk about both. I wanted you to have a physical experience of it first, and it gives us a chance to move and shake around a little bit. All right, come on back to sitting. And I'm going to share some slides here. We're going to go back and forth between sharing and not sharing. It sounds like a childhood playground, doesn't it? Sharing and not sharing. Sometimes we share, sometimes we don't. And what I'd like to do next is exercise the chat feature. I'd like you to think about, then answer, why is it you exercise? Another way to say it is, why do you set exercise goals? And let's acknowledge that there's surface level reasons for this and there's deep esoteric reasons for it. Feel free to put them all down. So you can enter multiple times in the chat. In the chat, just tell us, why is it that you exercise? Why do you set exercise goals? All right, have at it. And as we see chats coming in, we see everything from wanting to lose weight, wanting to be fitter, wanting to sleep better, wanting better digestion. Yeah. Oh, there we go. There's the one. Just want to be happy. Nice. Yeah, time with family. Great. You can do this with other people. Time with friends. Fantastic. So just like the experience that we had to start, that physical experience, let's hold those ideas. And in the spirit of holding, let's have you put your seatbelts on. Seatbelts on. Here is what I'm hoping you will walk away from this experience with. Number one, I want you to have a sense of why exercise sticks. So why is it sometimes it works out, fits into our life, and or that person you know who is always very compliant with exercise, why are they compliant with that? Because if we understand why compliance sticks, we'll start to understand what we can do to make it better for ourselves. Next is to appreciate how breath is connected to all this. And I know you're thinking, like, how is that connected? I'm going to make that connection for you. And then next, I'd like you to walk away with at least a couple things that you can do with your breathing to leverage compliance that meets your goals. At the end of that, I'm going to give you one extra thing, a golden bit. Now, those of you who are steeped in the Breathe Your Truth world, you know this diagram that just popped up. We call this the triple M triangle. It is the filter through which we look at breath. So when we look at the breath, we look at the mechanical aspect of breathing, we can look at the biochemical or the mix part of breathing, and we can look at the psychophysiology or the mind part of breathing. Unabashedly, today, we're biasing the mind part. So we're making this connection between mind and breath and how that plays out in our behavior, our compliance to exercise. It's a very fast trip that we're going to do today. I want to let you know that there is a class starting next Thursday, kind of the mothership class of Breathe Your Truth. This is an 8-week, 1 hour a week experience where we bathe ourselves in the triple M triangle. We take time in the mechanics, we take time in the chemistry, we take time in the psychophysiology of breathing. I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail at the end, but I want to just throw it out right now that if this is making you lean in and you're saying, I want more, I've got something for you. All right, now let's get to this why exercise sticks. And I'm going to present what I think is a simple and yet, if not profound, at least fair representation of why it sticks and why it doesn't. Let's first acknowledge that oftentimes exercise plans stick for ourselves or for other people when we pursue them out of dysfunction. All right, so we may have dysfunctional thoughts that aren't really very helpful, like, I'm not enough, I need to lose weight, I'm not fit enough, I'm super competitive and I want to beat somebody or beat myself in this thing. All right, those are actually dysfunctional reasons that can equal compliance. They can get us into the gym, they can get us on the track, they can get us on our bike, get us out walking. And then there's the other end of the continuum that also equals compliance, which is enlightenment. All right, those times when we exercise to celebrate the health that we do have, to be with friends and family, to be engaged in life. This appreciation that when we move our physical body, if we do it correctly, we can move our spiritual body as well. It's when we realize that doing this gets us happier to evolution, happier to happiness. Now, most of us sit somewhere in between, and we have behaviors that look like both ends of the spectrum. What I'm proposing is when we tend to move more towards the dysfunction, we tend to brilliantly sabotage our exercise. In other words, it's like our psychology, our body-mind makes a choice and it says, okay, I could go to the gym and just magnify dysfunction that I already have, or not go to the gym and at least not be worse. And it makes that decision to not go. Now, I know this isn't all the time, but I think it is a lot of the times. In other words, I'm congratulating you and I'm saying those times you didn't exercise, it was probably the better choice, because had you gone, it may not have been for the best reasons. The more practiced we get at going and engaging for the right reasons. In other words, the reasons that move our spirit, the more we can't help but go. And we're going to tie the breath into that connection to spirit. As I see it, the breath is a portal. All right. If we really look at what happens with our breathing, what happens with our neurophysiology, our chemistry, the way our body functions, the way our mind functions, it becomes very obvious that how we feel is how we breathe, and how we breathe is how we feel. So it's like breath is this portal to our spirit, to our aliveness, our sense of happiness, of joy, of tranquility, of excitement, of all this stuff. It can also be the portal that shows us clearly stuff we don't love. All right. It could be stories we're holding that don't serve us well. And an uncomfortable part of connecting to the breath at times is that we actually start to see those stories. And I'm going to advocate that when that happens, that is super cool. Okay. Not always comfortable, but it does help move the dial. Anytime we can shed light on something, we give it a chance to change. We don't have to approach it with this idea of knowing what the change is that we want. We can simply expose a story we're holding and let the light that comes from that change that. So the breath is a portal to stories, good and bad, that we hold. Again, unabashedly, we're playing in this mind part of connecting breath to our self, our psyche. I'm going to say something that in some ways can seem radical, and hopefully also as I say it, it becomes obvious. It was a couple years ago that I finally said this to myself, and realizing why breath was becoming so important to me. And that's just simply, what you train is what you get. All right. Seems obvious. If we train our biceps, we get bigger biceps. If we train our ability to run faster, we, in general, get to run faster. What if that also applies to breath? In other words, what if when we're training, we're not treating the breath well? We magnify whatever it is we do during our training, during our exercise with our breath. It will magnify for better or for worse. My story around this is I can tell you, growing up swimming, especially college competitive swimming years where things were very anxiety provoking, and then I go right from that into competitive cycling. I've got a rich history of going to the gym, of exercising. And as I look back on that, I can tell you that much of that time was dysfunction driven. And especially in the weight room, it would take me years to realize this, but I was actually training dysfunctional breathing. There's a lot about swimming, mouth breathing, breathing a bunch that trains dysfunctional breathing. Then if you take that into, let's say, the gym, where you're doing a lot of breath holding, a lot of irregular breathing, all of a sudden now, we shouldn't be surprised that during our working day, we're also breathing in patterns that aren't good, and it's starting to disrupt sleep, which was my story. Like I said, it would take me years to actually figure this out. And my goal is to actually fast track many people so we don't have to go through the years that it took me to get this part right. So again, let's just keep in mind that whatever we do during our exercise time, whether it's out on the trail, on a bike, in a gym, in a yoga studio, doing Qigong, whatever it is, however we're treating our breath during that time is going to dictate how it shows up later, during our workday, during sleep. So it's becoming very important to actually treat our breath well while we're engaged in activities that we're calling exercise, our training time. Now, I am moving towards what is it that we do then during those times that gives us this edge, this advantage to making exercise stick in a way that is good. And I want to talk about set and setting. In other words, the context that we hold this information is really important. One context that helps move this forward is the recognition that anytime we step into whatever training we've decided to do, if we could take a moment to acknowledge what our intention is, and hopefully pick an intention that falls in the enlightened end of the spectrum. We're going to automatically go to some dysfunctional ones, but at least pick one that rests in that enlightened place. Again, that could be simply to celebrate the health that you do have, to spend time with people you like being around, or to actually get some time on your own. All of it recognizing moves us to a place of equilibrium, of peace, of happiness. Pick something around that. It doesn't even have to be foremost, but let that kind of cycle through your psyche as you step into the world of training. Next is to do a check on your emotional resilience. When we start to pay attention to the breath and play with the breath, it does take a fair amount of emotional resilience, and not every day is created equal. There are times where our emotional resilience is on the lower end. And so what I encourage you to do is pick easier practices. As we go through different activities and different things you can do with your breathing, we're going to put them in a hierarchy of easy to hard. Absolutely nothing wrong with taking an easy day. Simply being aware of what you're doing with your breathing can move mountains. So you do a quick check on what is it you want to get out of this workout, and what's your emotional resilience. If your emotional resilience is high, go for it. If you're on the low end, make it a little bit easier. All right, so let's talk about examples of what I call dogging the breath. All right, things that we can do during training that actually close the window on the portal, kind of shut things down, build dysfunctional breathing patterns. First one, the most popular one that I hear in great prevalence is frequent breath holding, and then kind of catch-up breathing. People will usually say, I feel like I need to learn to breathe more because they've just noticed that they've held their breath. Secret about that is the reason they were holding their breath is prior to that they were breathing like a maniac, and the body just has built-in mechanisms that says, stop the madness, and we hold our breath to kind of let things balance out. The wild part is when our mind realizes we've been holding our breath, then all of a sudden it starts to build in this incorrect story that we need to learn to breathe more. No, we actually need to learn to breathe better and actually breathe less. So frequent breath holding, then the catch-up breathing, gasping for air, they kind of all fall in the same category. They're all a symptom of the same thing. We shut down our portal, our willingness to actually see where we are. And this is one way to help us kind of hide from ourselves, hide from that which we can see. Next is mouth breathing. So mouth breathing is an anxiety-provoking thing. It also can be driven by anxiety. So as we feel disconnected, another term for anxiety, we'll tend to mouth breathe. We'll also tend to breathe in our upper chest. All right? These are things that get us ready for fight or flight. These are things of just elevated state, us feeling disconnected, us feeling unhappy. We do these things automatically. And then my favorite, fast, shallow breathing. Right? So fast, shallow breathing should show up during a workout when you're really pushing it. It shouldn't show up during warm-up. It shouldn't show up for most of the workout when we really should be in control. So these are things we generally do without permission. In other words, they just happen when mentally we've decided that we're going to close down the portal. We switch to these. Doing these things will also mentally close down the portal. The benefits. Oh yes, sorry, I've got one more in here. This too slow breathing. I throw this in to be just a little bit provocative to the yogis out there. There are many yoga practices that drop breathing to a very slow rate, and it is absolutely true that most of us are well served to breathe slower than what we typically do. Yoga takes that to the other end, which I think is also a way to close down the portal, where we drop breathing down so slow, where our primary focus is on achieving around slowness, which I put in the dysfunctional category. There is a rate, science shows us that there is a rate that we breathe at where our systems move into a nice equilibrium. And we don't have to breathe there all the time during a yoga practice, a Pilates practice, a Qigong practice. But to breathe there most of the time is probably accurate. 5.5 breaths per minute. Those of you who have been through the Breath Catalyst or have been through any of the Optimal Breathing Blueprint classes, you know where that number comes from. It's a resonant breathing frequency. I'm going to hold myself back from getting into that too much right now. But just know there is science around that. When we take our breathing to slower rates than that and try and do that a bunch, it's another way to create dysfunctional breathing. It's another way we kind of close down the portal of access to really being able to see where we are. All right, so now next up, let's talk about the benefits of keeping the door open before we jump into how to keep the door open. The benefits of it are we get to see more. All right, now there's a plus and minus to that. There are many times things we actually don't want to see. All right, but a commitment to just keeping it open, a commitment to paying attention to our breathing, to staying connected to our breathing allows us to see more. We get to see more in our peripheral vision. We get to see more of what we're actually thinking and feeling. It helps expose stories that aren't helpful. All right. Look at that and think, you know what? I would rather know if I'm thinking something that's not helpful. Believe it or not, there are many times during the day we think things without us even realizing we're thinking it, but it has an effect on our physiology. When we can start to shed the light of awareness by paying attention to our breathing, paying attention to the stories that live right next to it, we get to start to see these things that aren't helpful. That act alone helps them change. We tend to be smarter about picking the appropriate intensity of an activity, of an exercise, whether it's duration or exact intensity. We start to make better choices. We use better mechanics. So when we're paying attention to our breathing, when we're breathing well, we tend to use better mechanics. One example of that is we tend to breathe lower in the body. As we take a breath in, our belly fills, our lower ribs expand, and as we breathe out, it comes back. When we're not paying attention, when we're closing down the portal mentally, we sort of don't really want to be there. We just want to get through things fast. Boom, our breathing starts to move up into our upper chest. Poor mechanics of breathing. We make better choices, anything from the activity that we're doing, again, to the duration, the amount of time that we're there, or even how we're holding our body while we're doing it. We just are more dialed in. And essentially, this shows up to say we get more for less. I am absolutely convinced of this, that let's say weight training in the weight room, you do not have to move as much weight to get benefit out of it when you're truly paying attention to what you're doing. Think of it this way. When we really pay attention, our mind automatically fires the muscle better. We recruit more motor units. When we're not paying attention, when we're disconnected with our breathing, our body struggles to turn on all the motor units it should. We have less of the muscle actually getting the work. So less weight, more attention, better outcome. It's easier, less for more. How cool is that? All of this translates to the squishy, yet really why we're there, more happiness. Okay? Even if in the moment it doesn't feel that way. All right? And I completely understand, and I see it with people, the dilemma that comes from paying attention to your breathing, especially when you're exercising, is in that it gets us closer to the stories that we hold that we don't like. We can feel them even before those stories come to our brain in English or whatever language we're using. We will feel those stories in our body chemically, electrically, literally, before they become stories of language. And when they're biased towards the dysfunction, they don't feel good. So to pay attention to the breathing, to shed light on them, yeah, doesn't feel good. But I guarantee you, shed that light on it, and they will start to change. All right, let's talk about the practice stuff we can do. Still kind of general here. There are two major categories of things we can do with the breath during a training session. One is be aware of it. Wildly impactful. We could stop the webinar right now and just rest on this and say, if you simply become aware of what you're doing in time, things will balance out. Now, we're not going to stop there because I'm greedy, and we're going to talk about some other things we can do, other levers we can pull that are going to magnify the effects we want. We can play with the location of the breath. In other words, we can breathe intentionally in the chest. We can breathe intentionally down low. We can do both. We can breathe middle part, solar plexus. We can pick geographically where the breath happens in the body. We can pick the rate and the ratio. In other words, how fast we're breathing per minute. And we can even play with the amount of time we spend in the inhale versus the exhale. Playing with that actually changes things. For instance, if we want to bring a sense of calmness to the body, calm and controlled in the middle of an activity, we can extend the exhale, breathe out just a little bit longer, especially slowing down the first part of the exhale. On the flip side, if we want to start to amp the body up, we can actually take a little bit longer inhale and a quick, powerful exhale out. What that'll do is give a net gain towards excitement in the nervous system that can be very helpful. Then we can play with the volume. We can intentionally make the volume low. In other words, let the breath become very subtle so that we are intentionally building up carbon dioxide, knowing that the more we practice exposing our body to carbon dioxide, the more tolerant we are of lactic acid, the better our performance becomes. Just as we can play with the volume in a way that starts to blow off carbon dioxide when we know things are really building so that we can keep performing at a level. Then lastly, timing. So we can play with our timing of when we're breathing during an activity, when we're biasing things. Now, I don't expect by the time we're done with the minutes we have ahead of us that you're going to be completely proficient at this, but just understanding these concepts around it, when I go through specific things to do based on the activity you're doing, you'll start to get a sense of where the potential is. And that's the part that I want you to get. I think there's still going to be at least a couple things that land that make you say, I can do that starting later today, or I can do that starting tomorrow. So let's do it. Let's go specifically. Let's talk about what we can do during a yoga, a Pilates, and a Qigong practice that help us keep the portal open. Now, these three activities are not all the same, but they do share a common theme and pursuit of mindful awareness of the body. So they're a great place to bring in these practices because by nature, they encourage it. So that first one, like I said, we could stop there, simply being aware of what you're doing. I do want to tell you a little bit of a secret around what we know when people become aware of their breath. And this should actually be a little bit of a relief to you because you already sense it. When you start to pay attention to your breathing, you mess it up. Most all of us, when we pay attention, we start to manipulate it. Even though the cue is don't change it, just watch it, we can't help ourselves. The second we start to watch it, we slow it down a little bit, we start to play with the inhale, exhale, and pretty soon we're lost in it going, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Nothing really feels right. All right, I hear that a fair amount when we start doing breath work with folks. And all I can say is, yep, that's okay. Your body has got a pretty big margin of error of what you do, don't do with it. And it's still going to be just fine. That practice of shedding light, that's really what it is. What you actually do with your breathing, less important. Most important part is put a little light on it, start to see what you are doing. Then, subtle breathing by default for all three of these. Knowing that we tend to actually elevate the breathing when we pay attention to it, I feel very comfortable giving the cue of during an asana practice in yoga, during movement in Qigong, during movement in Pilates, take most of your time where what you're trying to do is guide yourself gently into a more subtle breath, a little bit less breathing, because we tend to overdo it. And when we do that, we change our chemistry in a way that makes it hard for oxygen to get out of the blood. As soon as we kind of step towards the subtle, our chemistry shifts and now oxygen moves out nicely. If that concept is new to you, don't worry, we've got things to help you out with it. Those of you who are well steeped in this, yes, you know what I'm talking about. Next is nasal breathing by default. There are times where we use mouth breathing, especially breathing in through the nose, breathing out through the mouth. Nice way to purge. There are times during a yoga, Pilates, and a Qigong practice where purging is actually the goal. But purging is a small amount of time that we spend in those three practices. Most of the practice is more learning to contain and to build energy. And for that, we're in and out through the nose. Then, connect and disconnect breath. You had a chance to try this already. Let me tell you about the benefits of both. Connecting the breath to movement tends to elevate our consciousness around the breath and elevate our consciousness around our internal experience. Two very good things. On top of that, if we keep this game of a subtle breath on top of it, we're getting good chemistry reaction with it as well. To disconnect the breath also has some cool features. It's as if saying, I can let the world whirl around me and I can still hold my center. So for instance, when we were doing just that easy squat, as we pick that movement up, you can imagine that sort of being the world whirling around us and us having to play in that whirling around world. And yet we can train our body to still keep a center point where we're still focused. And so when we intentionally do that work in a Pilates, yoga, Qigong practice, where we're keeping the breath steady while we're whirling our arms and legs around, carries benefit. You may be A bell may be going off by now, and if it isn't, let me help you out with that. There are many things we can do with the breathing. The key is actually to be intentional about it, to do it voluntarily. When it happens by accident, when it happens without us really making a choice around it, that's when it tends to drift towards the dysfunction. We can do almost anything, but if we do it intentionally, it actually carries a bit of light with it. Last thing on here, well beyond the scope of our time together today, but I want to at least just throw this out there that you know this is work that can be done and is done in all three of these, is intermittent hypoxic training and hyperventilation. All right, one of them is breathing way less than what you metabolically need, if not breathing at all. The other is way over breathing. Pranayama practices, great examples of both of those. Some pranayama practices really suppress the breath, and others really elevate the breath way beyond the metabolic demand. Both of those create a hormetic stress. Again, when done voluntarily, can move the system forward. Next up, walking, cycling, running, rowing. I know it's kind of wild, again, to throw all those together, but those are just things that we generally engage in for aerobic activity. We do them for longer periods of time. Here, as with all of them, number one thing is building awareness around what you're doing with your breathing. Next one is to breathe low first. Most of us, when we're in a relaxed and a peaceful state, we breathe primarily low. All right, so we're breathing into our belly, we're breathing into our low back. We get this 360-degree expansion. And then as life elevates and gets wilder, we start to move up. Now, what we would ideally like is that we don't lose the belly part. So we can actually start to elevate our breathing, start to move up into our chest, but have it start low. When we don't think about it, we tend to just go belly, chest, and now we're just chest breathing. Incredibly inefficient, jacks the body up from an electrical standpoint. Mechanically, it's very hard to get air in, so we start having to work really hard when we're using our chest and our neck to breathe. We can do it, but it comes at a cost. When stuff starts getting intense, we still tell ourselves, initiate the breath from low. So the first thing that moves is our belly back, and then our chest moves. We're going to be much more efficient. And that may sound like a wild thing to do, but absolutely you can train your body to, boom, first move from low. Just takes being conscious of it. Next up is nasal breathing. Yes. I used to think that you really just needed to hold nasal breathing until you hit about moderate intensity. And I now believe that no, actually, you take nasal breathing into high intensity. It took learning it for myself. It took actually really committing to it and realizing that it actually changes pretty quick, your tolerance. And when you get yourself to a place where you can maintain nasal breathing during intense activity, performance elevates, heart rate drops. Two awesome things. That means you can have a bigger output with much less effort. Who doesn't want that? There are strategies to use in getting to that place. And so just know that they exist. But that is the goal, is to be able to maintain nasal breathing even during high intensity. Not the highest, but hardly any of us actually hit that place during training. And then, yes, intermittent hypoxic training lends itself very well to walking, cycling, rowing, where we actually intentionally breathe much, much less than we need so that we can practice exposure to carbon dioxide, dopamine, and some other cool things. I don't encourage you to run out and start holding your breath while you do it. There, like I say, there are protocols, there are stepwise patterns, there are ways to keep that safe. But just know that those are ways we can play with the breath to start to bring ourselves to these elevated states. Last up is the weight room. My favorite, because I think it's where we can create the most dysfunction. Most people moving around a gym weight room are doing that series of breath holding, catch up. Gasps, holding the breath, catch up. This pattern that's really difficult on our nervous system. And then they wonder why, as the day goes on, they're maintaining a certain level of anxiety and why they're not sleeping well, because we're training a pattern that gets in our way. So yes, awareness without breath holding, specifically when you're in the weight room. We were asking people see if you can maintain that series of bench presses without having a phase where you hold your breath. Number one thing. Next up is to play this game, and you'll see these two together, number 2 and number 3, strength and power work. Both of them just a little bit different. Strength, we're generally looking at strength and coordination, let's say 3 sets of 10. That's most of what we're doing in the weight room, trying to gain strength. We'll do some power activities to actually gain power. So not necessarily gaining strength with it, but we're increasing our output over a short period of time. Let's say a squat jump. All right, so someone who has to do burst type activities is going to train power a fair amount. For all of us, it's good to train power because there are times we need to jump out of the way of a moving bus. Okay, but most of our work is done strength training. What I'm going to tell you about these two is a little bit of splitting hairs, but for those of you who already are good at awareness and you're starting to play with timing, in other words, what you're doing with your breath during certain phases of a workout, let me give you a little direction with this. If you want to gain strength, coordinate the exhale with the eccentric part of the motion. Now, the eccentric part is the part of the muscle contraction where the muscle is actually lengthening. So if we look at a biceps curl, if I bring my hand in, my biceps got shortened, that's a concentric. That's the shortening phase. If I still navigate that weight as I push my arm away, I'm still using my biceps. It's just that it's lengthening in the process. So if I've got a dumbbell, that's exactly what's happening. So as I bring that dumbbell up, the muscle has shortened. Now as I lower it, it's not that the muscle gets to go on vacation, and in fact, it's working a fair amount to lower it down. That's the lengthening phase. As it turns out, that's actually the phase where we do the best strength training. And so what I recommend you do is time the exhale with the eccentric phase of the contraction. By doing that, we time kind of the most valuable part of the breath in terms of building coordination, building balance, and that's the exhale. That's when we tend to be our best at recruiting the core. It's when we tend to be our best at kind of navigating the show. Breath in gets us there, breath out navigates the show. So if you're doing regular strength training, let's pair the exhale, pair the breath out with the kind of slow lengthening phase. Our goal is really to gain more strength. If we want power, let's flip that. Because here we're saying it's that burst that gets us from A to B that we're going to bias. And here, now let's put the exhale with this phase. And this actually instinctively happens more than what we talked about for the strength training one. A squat jump is a good example. So where you're going down into a squat and then you're jumping up. There, the jump up is the concentric or the muscle shortening phase. It's the part that's going to feel comfortable doing that exhale. So we blow out fast and big. We do a slow breath in, get into position, powerful breath out, and we shoot up off the floor. That, like I say, generally feels pretty natural to do. That's a good example of an activity that's lighting the system up. We get a nice long inhale, short, powerful exhale. Again, we talked about how we can play with the ratio between the inhale and the exhale to light the system up or drop the system down. Nasal breathing, yes, throughout a whole workout. There's very few things we should be doing in the weight room that actually require us to mouth breathe. If you're doing a one-time max lift, or if you really are pushing into a heavy aerobic zone, yeah, then you may come out of nasal breathing, but for the most part, we're nasal breathing all the way. So I completely appreciate that I've flown over the top and dropped a whole ton of information. Do not feel like you have to understand all that. My hope is that at least a couple things dropped. You were close to doing it. You got a little bit of information now, and hopefully it makes it drop a little bit more. I have resources for you if you want to dive deeper. When we're done with the call, I'm going to send out a PDF. We're also going to email that out to everybody that will give you access points to classes that are specific to each one of these areas. Just wanted to, like I say, fly over the top and give you a bit of information on it here. But right now you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, like should everything be about the breath? And so let's answer that question. And my answer to that is yes. All right. It's taken me a couple of years to get to that place where I now do this. So that is, I approach every workout as if it's a breath practice first. And then whatever I'm doing is secondary. And if that feels like terrorism, I say, give yourself time to get into it. Do it every other time. Do it every few times. If, as I say that, that makes you kind of lean in and go, wow, like that lightens things up. That's my hope, is that as we think of every breath, every workout is a breath practice first, it actually makes it a bit lighter. All right. It's as if to say, how you feel is more important than what you're doing. So take the load off of what you're doing and start to pay attention a bit more how you feel as you're actually doing it. That's the money. I promised you a golden bit. That golden bit is, just like training the body, the benefits actually happen after we've stressed ourselves. Okay, so it happens after the workout. If we know this, we can magnify this in a moment. And so what I'm saying is, when you're done with whatever your practice is, your exercise is, take a moment, check in. Maybe you do a short meditation. Maybe you simply give an internal smile to yourself, or you take a few breath cycles where you let the breath quiet, knowing that that brings the nervous system back. Take a few moments, take a few minutes, whatever it is. Done with the practice, do a sincere check-in with yourself and sincere smile back. And I'm convinced that magnifies the benefit of it. That's what moves you closer to the enlightened stage of a workout as opposed to the dysfunction part. So don't miss that little benefit. The yoga world has figured this out. Every yoga class I've been to ends with everybody's favorite Shavasana. It is literally just to take time. There generally are virtually no instructions to it other than to lie on your back, palms facing skyward, legs gently rolling out, get comfortable, put something soft under your head, put an eye mask on if you'd like. The idea is to let the dust settle and to be in a pleasant place. Like I said, I think you can do this in a moment if you get skilled at it. And it also can be very sweet to take a couple minutes to just sit, relax, let everything calm down, enjoy it. All right, let's head to summary. I had to summarize everything I've said. Number one, have this intention to open the door. Keep the portal open. Pay attention to how you're breathing. Pay attention to how you're feeling, what you're thinking. Just that alone, huge. That ties into awareness. Next up is nose breathing. It's another way for you to stay dialed into your breathing, and it's mechanically good, chemically good, and electrically good for your body. Practice tying and untying movements. So do some movements where you're coordinating them with the breath, and then do some movements where you're just being that witness, doing the movement, but keeping your breath steady. And then lastly, end consciously. So I promised I'd tell you a little bit more about the Breath Catalyst. This is an 8-week course where in the first week we do next level mechanics. We get into the nitty gritty of how do you use the mechanics of good breathing to actually improve the way the body works. And we talk about good breathing as more than box breathing. In other words, we jump into the chemistry of breathing and say it isn't just about doing a certain pattern. There are things that we do that bump up or deteriorate the chemistry of our body, and we build some skill around that. Then next up is we use the breath to build the mind, and then after that we use the mind to build the breath. Again, they go back and forth. There are practices we can do with the breath to improve the mind. There are practices we can do with the mind to improve the breath. We do both. And then we use that information that we've gained in the first 4 weeks to start doing things like supercharging our relaxation time, getting more out of rest time. We jump into the world of using breath for performance, and then we even go after building anxiety shields. So breath practices we can do that help give us a little more leverage against that thing that most all of us have some experience with, if not a lot of experience with, which is anxiety. And then we land it all. So we take that last week, the 8th week, where we start to boil this down and get solid with what our plan is going forward. Now, this class takes off again next Thursday, a week from today, on February 6th. It runs 6 to 7 at night, Central Time, so 7 to 8 for you Eastern folks, and 4 to 5 for you folks Pacific. Mountain, well, I know you can do the math. All right. The price for that is $697. That is marked down from $967. We're going to hold that price until the end of the day on Sunday, February 9th. So if you have an interest, we'd love to see you in that class. Again, I am going to give you a handout at the end of this that has access to this class and then also the other smaller classes that will give you a little more leverage if you want to, let's say, learn more about swimming or more about yoga or qigong, what to do with your breathing. We've got stuff for you. So now let's break for questions. And before we do that, if you've got to take off now, I want to just say thank you very much for joining the webinar. If you've got questions, reach out to me, David@breatheyourtruth.com. Otherwise, yeah, let's go after questions.